Hello, everybody. I'm here today to talk to you about the Cold War. We're going to focus on about the first 25 years or so of this big, huge, long struggle that shaped a whole lot of our history here in the U.S. So we're going to start with the idea of what the Cold War wasn't. So if you look at this picture on the screen, that never happened. No nuclear weapons were used on each other by the U.S. or the Soviet Union, and that's really why we call this a Cold War, because the conflicts that happened were never really between the two of us. And that's a good thing, looking back on it. So, to understand the Cold War, what you need to understand really is the struggle that it was. On the one side, you had the idea that communism needed to be spread, and on the other side, you had our policy of containing communism, which was created by this George Kennan guy, who was a U.S. ambassador, and his theory was that the Soviet Union needed to be contained and not allowed to get other countries to become communist like them. That was a policy that was followed by every president we had during the Cold War, with varying levels of success. So, one of the methodologies of fighting the Cold War was espionage, very Hollywood movie type stuff. You've got the CIA on our side, plus the KGB on the Soviet side, basically spying on each other. You also had a huge arms race, not just nuclear weaponry, but also militaries. And then at the end of the day was which side was able to get more allies. If you look at the bottom of your screen, NATO was basically the US's allies. The Warsaw Pact was the Soviet Union's allies. So there became all these proxy wars throughout the world, never really between the two of us, but between the U.S. and third world countries that we thought were a little too communist, and then on the flip side, third world countries that the Soviet Union would like to create as a communist nation. So the missile gap was something that gave us an early advantage in the Cold War, but we were soon caught up to. So if you look on your screen, this is the Soviet Union exploding its first A-bomb, which was 4 years after we did. And then both sides got the H-bomb, and it became just a race to who could get the newest, biggest, and baddest weapon. Kind of defines the Cold War, and if you see this little sign right here, this kind of symbolizes the fear of both sides having that capability. Fallout shelters were pretty common, especially here in the U.S. People had shelters that they knew where they were, and they had a plan as to what would happen if nuclear war did break out, and that was a real possibility. So I'd like to get into some examples with you of just some events in the Cold War to give you a sense of how things were going in terms of our containment of communism. The first is the loss of China to communism. In 1949, China becomes a communist nation. We tried to stop that from happening. We failed. The Chinese Civil War was won by the communists. Our aid, our money, our weapons, all of that was for naught, and China was lost. The president at the time, President Truman, really took a hit for that. He was also the president during the Korean War, which was much more of a success for us. North Korea tried to invade South Korea and integrate the whole peninsula of Korea into one communist nation. The U.S., with the help of the UN, stopped that. So here you see on this page, this is Kim Il-sung. He was the leader of North Korea at the time. His family is still in charge of North Korea at the current moment, and the gentleman on the lower right was the South Korean leader. So another example of this is some of the Soviet Union's actions. A lot of the countries in Eastern Europe, the Soviets wanted to create a buffer between themselves and the rest of Europe, especially Germany. So they created a bunch of satellite nations, is what we call them. Some of them with an extreme amount of force. Hungary is an example of that. The USSR rolled their tanks into Hungary and crushed basically a rebellion against a communist regime there and installed a communist nation in there permanently, at least for a very long time. So that's one example of how strong the Soviet Union had a grip on certain areas of the world. Sputnik. This was not a good day for the United States. This is when the Soviet Union, as you see it flying across the screen, this is when the Soviet Union launched a satellite into space. First nation to do that. This freaked us out on a number of levels. First of all, because if they can get something into space, that means they can get a missile to us. And they got nukes, so that's a problem for us. The other problem is they have beat us technologically, which was an advantage we had enjoyed earlier. Now we don't. So we had to deal with that. Okay, and there you see kind of the wrap up of that edge that they had on us now. We also got caught spying on them over their airspace. This gentleman was shot down over the USSR. He was supposed to commit suicide with a cyanide capsule. It didn't work. He was interrogated, admitted that he was an American. This was another bad moment for the U.S. and kind of heated up some tensions. The Berlin Wall goes up in 1961. Soviet Union and East Germany decided that they wanted to hammer down on their people leaving for West Germany. So this was kind of a symbol of the Cold War, an actual literal wall between the East and the West. And there you see it in the picture right there. The Bay of Pigs is when the U.S. tried to invade Cuba and overthrow a communist regime there. It didn't work. It was a huge disaster. The president had to go on TV and apologize for it and basically just take the blame for it. This was another, big oops for the United States in terms of our relations with the USSR and with a nation very close to us. If you look at that picture, the span between Cuba and the U.S. is only 90 miles. A year later, we discovered that the Cubans had missiles, and they had sites set up for more missiles that the Soviet Union was supplying them. We're assuming that those were nukes. As you see in the picture, the H-bombs that Kennedy and Khrushchev are sitting on, and basically we had a stare down, just like you see in the cartoon here. Neither side blinked, but neither side hit the button either. So essentially there was an agreement made. We would remove some missiles from Europe that were pointed at them. They would remove missiles from Cuba, and we've never really gotten along with Cuba since. So this was the closest we came to World War III for sure. And as you can see here, just the proximity of Cuba to the U.S., this was another freak-out moment for the citizens of the U.S. for sure. The Vietnam War is another example of the U.S. trying to contain communism. I'll just tell you right up front, it was a massive failure. After years and years of war here, we decided to pull out of the war. We decided the South Vietnamese could hold their own. As soon as we left, North Vietnam invaded the South. They integrated both countries into one nation. They became a communist nation. So this was a failure in terms of containing communism, and really becomes a black eye on the U.S., especially here at home, as the protests ramp up over time and people become very fed up with the war. The last couple of things I want to talk about involve the USSR crushing some more kind of uprisings. The first happened in Czechoslovakia, where basically there was a pro-democracy rebellion, and the Soviet Union sent in tanks and weaponry, and they actually had help from their allies, and they crushed this rebellion. So you have another example in Eastern Europe of how the Soviet Union had a very tight grip on things, and the U.S. wasn't really present at all. We focused our efforts in other areas of the world. The Soviet Union had Eastern Europe kind of all to their own. So these are the guys kind of that were targeted. This is the same guy actually. They were pro-democratic activists and protesters, and there were more than just this gentleman that suffered this fate, but these guys were arrested for speaking out, and their country was made to be, a communist nation. So what I would like for you to consider before next class is, who do you think was winning the Cold War? We'll just take kind of the information we have here and the stuff you knew before this video, and I'd like you to write a one-paragraph response to this. using some evidence to back up your claim. Were we winning? Was the Soviet Union winning? And back up your claim with evidence.